Thank you.
I think first there is a very important difference between climate change and water. In climate change, what you do can impact on your neighbors. In water, other than transboundary rivers, what you do does not impact on your neighbors. But this doesn't mean that there should not be cooperation among regions, because there's a lot that we can learn from our neighbors, and especially people in the same region, we have the same climatic conditions. What I would like from this forum would be that we need to talk a little bit more about this disconnect between the way we discuss water issues at the global and national level and what's actually happening on the ground. This is the 7th World Water Forum, and we have been talking about IWRM since Rio, and in fact even before Rio in Dublin, which was a year before Rio. And yet, on the ground, we still have all these problems. So when we talk about IWRM at World Water Forums, we always put up the slide of the definition by GWP. But on the ground, we don't see things moving. And it reminds me of a story that my wife once told me. In Malaysia, the Minister of Agriculture announces that, say, the price of fish is so much and vegetables is so much. And so she went to the market and she wanted to buy the fish. And then the fishmonger says, this is 10 ringgit. And my wife says, the minister on the radio says it's 5 ringgit. Then the fishmonger says, then you buy it from the minister. Because there is this disconnect between policies made and what's happening on the ground. And what we see happening on the ground is governments put a lot of emphasis on projects. Maybe because they have to meet the targets in the MDGs and so on. And the minister will come and he will officiate at the opening of a big project. And then everybody loses attention on the project itself. And we do not get enough money to operate and to run it. And no minister has ever come back to an operating body to praise the organization for doing a good job. The only time a minister will come back is when the stakeholders complain. And then he will come and then he will try to find fault why things are not being done. And perhaps it's the way we are setting targets. We set targets in the MDGs, for example, that we will reduce the number of people with access to safe drinking water. And so we put a lot of focus on developing the projects. But at the end of it, if we do not put enough investment into sustainably carrying it out, it doesn't make sense, because after 2 years, then the whole thing breaks down. But governments have already reported back to the UN, I've met my targets. And so maybe when we set the targets for the SDGs, we should think a little bit about how we can bring it down to operational level.
Okay, very good point. Thank you very much. Can I go to you, Jayamala? 2 of the things you think very importantly need to be brought up to the regional level?
I would say data, more and more data on what we want to achieve and what we are achieving, sharing platforms which are amenable to extracting intelligence and actually have the ability to transfer knowledge in an actionable form. I'd say those are the 2 important things.
Okay, thank you. Pongs, any suggestions? 2 things from you?
Aside from what I brought up earlier, Ms. Chunghwa, on increasing our focus on youth-led projects and moving towards that direction, having been well advanced now on knowledge and support to youth networks, I'd also like to point out inclusiveness, that as I've been asked here to represent youth, but I also understand that, as Mr. Thierry said, that young farmers, they don't get to be here and we don't get necessarily to hear their opinions. we work closely with Plan International to bridge that gap because they work closely in communities. And in the young water leaders that we have here in the forum, we'd like to see more of young people who face the challenges, and we could work with them and to solve the problems that they face. Thank you.
Okay.
Sorry, can I just add one more point?
Yes.
When I said data, I would also like to see not just what has worked, but more importantly, what has not worked. I think we've spent so much money. If we can all understand what has not worked, it would really be useful to spend the dollars more effectively going forward. Thank you.
Okay, good point. And Mr. Mizutani-san, your 2 points.
Yes, I mentioned sharing the informations. The concrete way is the sharing information is we can provide the BCP manuals to the people because we are operate and maintain 300 project sites. We are closing a talk with local municipality, prepare for natural disaster, and we are conducting joint emergency training together with the municipalities. So those manuals, we are in a position to share the Asian countries' necessary papers.
Thank you. Dr. Kim, anything to add?
All those are very good points. And in addition to that, I feel the trade between regional trade is also very important in terms of food. Some countries, they are producing sufficient food. Some countries, they don't. But now, because of every country, they want to have food security by own. Then sometimes that doesn't make sense, even though they don't have sufficient water, but they are suffering. So maybe these still very sensitive issues, but if we can facilitate at least some sub-regional level for this trade on the food and also energy, because energy production also need water. Then some country, they may have sufficient water to generate hydropower, then they can export. Then the other country doesn't need to have really to invest this other thermal power project which will require cooling water, something like that. So we can look at region overall, then maybe we can best use our limited resources. That's one thing we need to think about. And second, I agree with our colleague, and innovation or technology transfer. This will be very important. And for example, I feel now water sector is, yes, that's not very dynamic, but one dynamic area is I can see wastewater management. Now, there are a lot of innovation is coming up. Then previously wastewater is black hole. So invest money, but never ending. But now it becomes revenue generating exercise. If you connect, then new technology are available. Then because of this small scale, so that cost is still expensive because now upfront cost, someone need to pay. Then if we recall solar energy, about 5 years ago, solar energy was so expensive. So no one wants to take the solar without having subsidy. But now in our assessment, within 5 years, solar energy will be compared with other traditional energy cost. Now because now we scaled up the solar energy use, then now the cost is very rapidly down. Then wind is the same. Wind now it's comparable already, but wind, that's costly. But on wind, that's already cost effective. But some years ago, it's very expensive compared with traditional energy. But I can see sanitation, if we can bundle, at least in the sub-regional level, regional level, we can scale up this new investment, new innovation, then perhaps the price will be very rapidly going down. Then it will be a very dynamic sector. So I have very big hope. Then this water sector, we can have very dynamic activities, investment, if we can put all together, if bundle. So I feel the water area is sometimes is very sensitive if you talk about transboundary. But if we look at more trade, virtual water issues, so trade, either food or energy, or if we can work together to reduce the cost of a new technology, that will help.
Great points. I'm going to open the floor again for a couple of questions, if you have burning questions. Yes, please. Microphone, please.
My name is Harshavardhan, and I work with Argyam Foundation.
It's working. Yeah.
So, what is coming out from the panelist discussion is that there's a nexus between all components from water, food, energy, sanitation, social and economic. But as we see in the next SDGs, there are 17 goals, and as you rightly said, Dr. Eid, that each goal has a constituency. And since this nexus is kind of emerging, we are yet to understand how the nexus works. In some sense, it relates one to each other. And if we have to have a harmonious balance between this whole ecosystem, where one doesn't override the other, how do we maintain that nexus and that balance while considering the stakeholders, right from community, local governments to central governments and then national, and also breaking away from the silos. So water being kind of addressed by various energy, agriculture. So how do we deal with that? So that's a comment, a suggestion. How do we look at breaking away from silos and bringing in a harmonious balance between this whole nexus, linking it to water, food, energy, the sanitation connect, which is kind of emerging right now. For the water resource as a threat.
Thank you for the question. Dr. Kim, I think probably you are well positioned to answer that, because when ADB decides what to invest, in many, many ways you have to look at this, nexus issues there as well. Would you like to respond a little bit?
I fully agree with your suggestions, and now we need to look at how we can break silos and we can make different agencies sit together. And then from our side, nexus issues we want to bring down to very specific activities and projects. So we can have a good case. Then that case can be replicated. For example, as I explained, this wastewater treatment, the used water, the treated water can be used, even sold to power generation company, and because of this revenue, now this wastewater treatment is economically viable. Previously, if you separate these two factory or plant, then it's never you can make this economically viable. But now, because of private sector, their innovation, they connected. Now it's viable. Then we want to scale up this one. So rather than talking, it's a very high levels on connectivity or nexus. Now we need to bring down. So on the ground, we need to make it happen, and then we need to share these cases, and we can scale up. That's the way. Thank you.
Can I direct this question to Ms. Utani-san from the private sector? Do you have one specific case that could respond to the question? Thank you.
Sorry. In case of Japan, all kind of wastewater sludge and also food waste, there is no land reclamation dispose. Everything converted energy by fermentation, fertilizers, or collecting phosphate for fertilizers. That technology, Dr. Kim said, that technology we can adopt it Asian countries, because waste we dispose, that is waste. But waste, you can convert it energy, that can be the energies. So that is important, I think.
Thank you very much. One more question, if there is any. Two more, great. Three, great, finally. Everyone is waking up. Okay. Can I just get, yeah, please.
Hi. My name is Deborah Tan from China Water Risk. Obviously focus on water issues in China. I'd like to sort of say that I think in China, the water, energy, and climate nexus is all together because China's the upper riparian of a lot of transboundary waters and also is at the point where she also has to add a lot of power on limited water resources. Also, the coal bases are right next to the agricultural heartlands, and so water savings in agriculture is very important for transfer to coal bases. But with the onset of climate change, it's also difficult. We did some analysis in a couple of coal-based provinces. Irrigation savings are going to be less and less because we're going to have to hold that water back, or rather we're going to need more power to power that, and power also requires water. So we're finding some tough choices to sort of recommend for power adds within China. More hydropower could lead to higher geopolitical risks. More coal, obviously, to more glacial melt, which is not beneficial for everyone globally. But I'm not sure if there are any solutions. And, you know, for China, there's also massive energy savings, which we haven't really sort of like talked about. And anytime we save power, we also save water. And you know, on a per capita basis, power per capita, China's quite high relative to everybody else. India and Indonesia, you know, probably India a fifth of China's per capita power, and Indonesia much less than India. And you know, as you all mentioned, hydro and coal are probably the cheapest form of power to add, and that's also going to add additional water issues because water, you know, water for cooling and so on. So, is solar energy the way out, or is wind turbines if those prices can actually fall? But then China is also the manufacturer of a lot of these equipment. Wind turbines need heavy rare earth elements, all of which are highly polluting at the moment because of the illegal rare earth market in China. So if we attend to consequences in the water space, are we not sort of raising some other problems in some other areas which we haven't really tackled? And China's, you know, responsible for 90% of rare earth production, not because it has the biggest reserves, but possibly because a lax policy environment and regulatory environment has also allowed these rare earths to be cheap. But then should then any one country sort of subsidize somebody else's country's renewable growth and drive by actually tapping those resources? And it's not just China's problem, it's the region's problems. And I feel that as an Asian living in Asia, it's not really prioritized at the moment, but we should prioritize it. I don't really think that I'd be glad if we actually had some solutions. I'd be really pleased to listen to some suggestions.
Sure, I'm going to gather 3 hands together before. So panelists, please be patient and think about it. So what do you want to respond? Can I go back? There's a hand in the back. Thank you. No, okay, there.
Good evening. I have 2 questions. One to Dr. Kai-Shu, the other one to Dr. Kim. For Dr. Kai-Ru, I like your story about the minister and the fishmonger. But essentially, we observe that the interests of the government and the people are actually aligned because the minister or the politician requires the support of the people to return to power. So if the people are requesting for proper water services and sanitation services, then by right, the politician should be putting emphasis on this and should be giving the people what they want. So are there deeper issues in your country or perhaps in the region which is hindering the improvement of services for water supply as well as sanitation? That's my question for Dr. Kai-Shu. My question for Dr. Kim is, you mentioned that there are funds to spend by ADB, but there's a lack of a good pipeline of projects. Is it because ADB has too stringent criteria in selecting what projects you want to fund? And what is the rate of return that ADB is looking at for the projects that you select?
Okay, one more. I think there's a hand in the middle. No? No more? Okay, front then. Terry.
Yeah, thank you. I would like to support the 4 key messages of Mr. Kim. He talked about wastewater treatment, trade, improving water use efficiency with the qualification that what's in it for the farmer. Because many farmers, very often, they lose money by what we recommend for them to improve water use efficiency. And finally, solar power and solar irrigation. We had a case study from INI on India, looking at the potential for solar pumping to revolutionize the nexus in India. We know is very much linked to groundwater. And by their estimate, that these are figures from pilots, $1,250 per hectare if you grow grains, pulses, and oilseeds, $4,200 per hectare if you grow fruit and vegetables, $84,000 per hectare if you farm solar power. 84,000. And we asked if there was not 1 0 too many. And, and these are actually figures from case studies. So yes, there's certainly a big potential for this if we make sure that this does not destroy our aquifers with free energy.
Okay. Thank you for the questions. Now back to the stage. Dr. Kim, there are a few questions direct to you. If you could answer them, that'd be great.
Yeah. On the China, these water issues, also the farmer issues, let me explain the way ADB is also helping to address. One area we are doing is ecosystem payment. So farmers, the upstream, farmers or rural area, they protect the water resources or they saved. Then downstream, they benefit. So now we are now pilot testing to introduce the payment system. So downstream, because of their benefit, so they can pay on these ecosystem services. This is what actually we want to help the farmers to address this incentive to keep environment. And second one is in China, the water issue is the location is very different. So their industry or agriculture area and the water available areas are very inconsistent. They are not matching. That's quite problem. But also this river pollution, polluted water is another problem. Even though in industry areas or more agricultural areas, you do not have much water, but because of industries or after agricultural product or livestock, the water polluted. So even your available water is small, but now the water is polluted. That's why the water issue becomes more severe. So we are helping Chinese government to improve this water quality. And we are doing a lot of the river cleanup project, including this wastewater treatment. So the entry point of this water can be treated, so the water source can be cleaner. Then that water can be easily used for many purposes. This is what actually we are helping to address these water issues in China. And the water project, yes, ADB, we address the rate of return, economic rate of return. So when we prepare our project, yes, that should be economically viable. But economically viable include, this is different from financially viable. Economically viable need to reflect their co-benefit. So in terms of rate of return, we look at more broad sense. However, now water project, usually we work with our counterpart. Then either the government, they do not give priority. So actually we cannot prepare the project in advance. And second, their information or their capacity is not there. So project preparation is we had some challenges to prepare the economically viable project. However, actually, ADB, we invest about 2 billion every year in water, but we want to scale up. And also, we want to bring some additional money from private sector. So this we are challenging. Not only from the public money, but also we want to bring some private money so we can have public-private partnership so we can address. So something like to use this to connect different water users so we can have some kind of economic benefit so that we can make the project is viable. Then this will require some, as our colleague said, the cross-institution, cross-sectoral collaborations. That's just some challenges. And another one is, if we look at our project implementation performance, then water sector, that's a relatively the progress is slow in terms of project implementation when you compare with other infrastructure projects. Because in water area, as we discussed, many stakeholders are involved and different institutions involved, and also water price. This is another issue we need to deal with. So that's why water project development is, we can say, more complex than other projects. So we suggest to prepare some more time and much upstream, so prepare good project in advance. So once we have sufficient resources, we can finance. Because project development, infrastructure, project development take time, but I can say water investment project take more time. Because also some environment issues also may come. That's why we need to prepare well the water infrastructure.
Thank you, Dr. Kim. And would colleagues on this side respond some points?
I had a question addressed to me, but before that, I'd just like to touch on what the lady talked about the situation in China. I think our appetite for energy and for water keeps on increasing. And with climate change, the availability of water that we can easily use is going to be much reduced. So the solution is not to do more on supply management, but rather to do more on demand management. And in the energy side, the low-lying fruit is really to increase the efficiency of use. In agriculture, we talked a lot about more crop per drop, and I was pushing for more crop, less drop, and that's how we have to do. And we have to design our systems so that we can be more resilient. If you look at floods, it's getting worse and worse, and in the future it's going to be even worse. And we cannot have the kind of money to protect against it. So we need to look back at how we deal with that situation. And back to the question about governments being accountable to voters. In actual fact, when you talk about democracy, a lot of it depends on the political machinery, even in the United States. It's a political machinery which forms people's perception and people's support for a party. And you get more accountability the lower down you go. So if you have an election for the mayor or for the village head, there would be more accountability. But when you're talking about national level, prefecture, provincial, state level, you don't quite get that kind of accountability. And yet, we have so little of these local government elections in developing countries. And even if we do have, a lot of the powers and the resources are retained at the national and at the state level, rather than at the town level or municipal level.
Thank you, Mark. Do you have some final words? Thank you.
Yes. In fact, my quick reflection is that I worked for 27 years for local government, so I have to support what you were just talking about. But to the complexity question of energy and water, I don't think I have a good answer, but I want to say that we need to be able to deal with the complexity. And with respect to one of my colleagues before, I don't think we can afford to simplify these things. We can uncomplicate the complexity, but I don't think we should simplify it. We're a smart species. We've got some great tools, and one of them is systems thinking, and I really think we need to embrace that systems thinking. So my comments earlier about T-shaped professionals, I'd like to reinforce. I think we need teams. That maybe it's a team in ADB around a water project, maybe it's a team in your organisation. The teams have to be transdisciplinary. I think we really need to embrace the future complexity because we can't afford not to.
Thank you. I think we did well in terms of the timing. And before we close, I'm going to give back the mic to our chair, Mr. Ravi, to do the conclusion. A big round of thank you and applause to the panelists. Thank you for the insightful sharing. Thank you. Ravi, the floor is yours. Thank you. Thank you.
I'm not going to try and... is that on? Yeah. I'm not going to try and wrap this up because the panelists have done a great job in explaining and negotiating complexity and difficulties and convergence. So I'm not going to try that. But what I'm going to say is that throughout these few days, and indeed before that, when we talk about a region, we talk about a region of staggering size. Everyone talks about Asia Pacific, 60% of the world's population. Staggering diversity. The largest country in the world and possibly the smallest country in the world. Old people and young people. So many different kinds of political systems. And then what Thierry talks about, the velocity of change, staggering transition, stages of transition. So it's easy to say that, well, give up, what can we do together? It's all too difficult. But actually, there are some principles that are common, that we can all embrace. And the principles are historically proven, so it isn't something typical of our region. And the principle is to have some sort of a theory of change which builds around the idea of policy development which focuses on infrastructure, institutions, and information. Policy development that believes in investment and capacity so that policies can be implemented and technologies that can support the implementation of policies. Now, that requires inclusive institutions. And by inclusive institutions, I don't mean necessarily very large institutions that necessarily employ thousands and thousands of people. It means institutions that are open to ideas, institutions that are open to participation. And that's national institutions, local institutions, and institutions like this, what we are. We are trying to work together to exchange ideas. And this is what is going to generate pace and change. When it comes to solutions, as many speakers have said, there is a lag between national intention and local action. One doesn't necessarily have to wait for national intention. You can do local action, and eventually if you have inclusive institutions, they will meet. The virtual spiral that the IWRM is. We go up the virtual spiral. But in crafting solutions, possibly we mustn't fear complexity. As Mark has said, do not fear complexity. Resist singularity. Do not say this everywhere. Celebrate diversity and insist on accountability. Those could be some slogans that we could use. All inclusive institutions are built on transparency and trust. And all successful policies need necessarily to be built on policies that take the long view and look at the last mile. So that's what we all have to look at. So let's work together using the warp of action, the weft of knowledge, and let's together weave a coat of many colors. Thank you.